Okay, and then here. Hi, good morning, everyone. If anyone is there, here we are in Honolulu. Anyway, I am Blake, as you'll see maybe from the announcement from last week. It's AL Blake, but you can just call me Blake. So I'll be leading this webinar in a couple minutes. I'm just gonna wait for people to tune in. Oh, that's cool. I can see myself. All right. Yeah, how do I know if people are watching me?
Click the video, make sure that computer is mute on your right.
It is.
Cool. So if you,
I just want to know if people are watching me. Sorry. It's very important. There's Liv. Liv is watching me, and that's what matters. No, I want to know if you guys are out there.
Yeah. So the eyes will tell you how many people.
Oh.
So just yet. And then this is going to be the, oh.
It's Anna. Hi, Anna. Okay. Oh, I see. All right, cool. Thanks. Anna says good morning, everybody. I say good morning, everybody, too. So does Liv. Cool. I see the lag.
Yeah. Always interesting when you actually see it.
All right, we were just hanging out, waiting for people. Somebody is liking this video. That's great. So last week we had a conference here, ICLDC, which was a whole lot of fun, and there are actually a lot of people who gave cool talks related to this topic, so should check those out. Ooh, somebody from Baluchistan. Wow. Greetings to you too, Kinza. Oh, cool, people. Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, awesome. That's great to see you guys joining in from other places in the world. All right, so yeah, we're just waiting a few minutes to see if more people would like to join.
Probably starting.
Okay. All right. So it's just about 9. So good morning / afternoon / evening / night. My name is Blake. Please just call me Blake. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about biocultural studies and traditional knowledge, and hopefully to support you in whatever projects you are interested in doing related to this topic. Okay, so let's get started. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about ways of knowing. So I'm going to kind of simplify the world and group cultures as one way or another way, which is not really the case, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to kind of simplify the world a little bit. So in some cultures, we have knowledge that's decontextualized. It's just kind of seen as objective, like anyone can access it, and it's subjective. And so it's explicitly verbalized, whether in words or whether written down. So this is my culture, maybe this is your culture, right? So if I want to know something, I just ask Google, right? It's already there, it's already just kind of, packaged for me to learn it. Whereas in many cultures, knowledge is embedded in context, it's subjective, and it's not necessarily something you even talk about. It might be something you just kind of know, you kind of develop a sense through developing your perception of different things and through developing your motor skills and your skill in recognizing situations and acting. So a lot of people learn a lot of things about the world through observation and practice. So this means that language actually can't encode all of a community's knowledge, because a lot of the traditional knowledge is usually not verbalized, it's not put into words, it's embedded in the practices. So basically, if you are not helping to transmit the cultural practice itself, whatever the traditional practice is, you're not really perpetuating the knowledge. However, if you do documentation of cultural practices, traditional practices, then these embodied skills of perception action can later be relearned. Essentially, people can relearn them through observing the documentation. It's not the same as through observing somebody in reality doing something, but it can help you to relearn that knowledge. So again, kind of grouping cultures into one of these two groups. A language like English, we have a long literary tradition. So people have been writing stuff down in English for a very long time. But that's not the case for most languages. Most languages have oral traditions, meaning that information that is actually talked about, which again is only some of the information, right? But the information that is actually made explicit is passed down via speech, not via writing. So what happens to that part of information when the language isn't spoken anymore? So we'll talk about the preservation of knowledge. So when a language is lost, then the oral history is also lost. And Indigenous people are very aware of local flora, fauna, rock soils associated with their land, as well as relationships between all those things, which is science. It's not always recognized as science, it is science, right? So if a language is lost, all this historical and scientific knowledge is also lost because it's not passed down anymore. So historical knowledge can also be, the history of a people themselves. So we have, I think probably Anna in the first webinar talked about language shift. So when you have language shift, you usually have kind of lifestyle changes as well, which again means stopping those traditional practices and stopping those traditional ways of knowing. And it also seems to be accompanied by a value shift a lot of times. So for these reasons, traditional knowledge is considered to be one of the more endangered subareas within domains of language or areas of language, things people talk about. So I'm going to ask you guys now, and then I'm going to ask you guys kind of again at the end of this. But you can just start, typing your comments now. So start thinking, like, what kinds of traditional knowledge do you already know? You might be kind of surprised by what you really actually do know. And maybe because nobody's ever taken an interest in it, or because it's common knowledge in your community, but it might not be common knowledge outside of your community, and it might not be common knowledge in your community in 20 years from now. So think about what you already do know, and then kind of think about what things you want to learn that you would like to know more about, and maybe what knowledge you see as maybe in the most danger of being lost. Maybe there's some cultural practices that are only practiced by a few elders in your community or something like that. I keep just saying like traditional knowledge, cultural practices. Now I'm going to give you some examples. So traditional knowledge can include things like cooking techniques, things like medicine, place names, plant and animal names, traditional celebrations, so many different things, right? This is a huge piece of culture. There's so many different things. So you can think of other examples of this, especially let us know if there's like traditional knowledge domain that you're particularly interested in documenting. Okay, so now I'm going to give you kind of some examples of how knowledge has been documented. So again, if we look back at sort of Western culture with this long literary tradition, if you look back at the Bible, there's actually a lot of passages in the Bible that are about grain, right? And I think maybe a lot of people in industrialized societies today, even if they eat wheat products every day, maybe they eat store-bought bread every day, they might not be aware of processes like threshing and winnowing, and that there's this chaff afterwards that you can also do stuff with, get rid of, throw away, or burn. So if you look at stuff like the Bible, you can just see interspersed throughout that all this knowledge that was quite culturally important. Or if you look at like an encyclopedia from the 17th century about elm, now in most industrialized societies, maybe people that have elms, right, areas where elm trees grow, if you ask people what's an elm, they might be able to tell you it's a tree. They might be able to identify what it looks like. But I don't think most people have this kind of extensive knowledge that's documented in this older encyclopedia here. So for example, there's all these uses for elm. If it's wet, right, like you can do with pumps and aqueducts and ship planks, all this stuff. And then it goes into elm is a great wood that it doesn't split, so you can make boxes and things like that. And then it starts talking about the leaves, right? You can feed the elm leaves to the cows when you're running out of other things to feed them. And then you can also use the leaf for medicinal practices. So this is just, you know, one entry for one plant. So imagine how much more information there is for all the other things in the natural environment. Hi. We have somebody look in the room here. Okay, so here's a little bit more recent, not still older. So this is from 1916, so about a century ago. So here you have a documentation of Hawaiian elevation terms. So you can see there's all these different terms. It's very, very rich vocabulary for all the different microhabitats of our islands here. So, and again, I don't think too many Hawaiian speakers today would know these terms if they hadn't been documented necessarily. Okay, so what's biocultural diversity? It has to do with, excuse me, the respect, it's related to respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous and local communities embodying traditional lifestyles relevant for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, and promote their wider application with the approval and involvement of the holders of such knowledge, innovations, and practices. So it's some sort of recognition that a lot of indigenous communities are really competent stewards of the land, and wanting to preserve that and recognizing a link between preserving the culture of the people and preserving the biology or the ecology of an area. What about biocultural language documentation? So again, there are so many examples. You could go on and on with this. Please tell us what kind of things you think would be interesting to document for you personally. But you could look at things like how does a language encode animal species or types of plants, or landscape or ecosystems, health, illness, which can include spiritual dimensions, agricultural practices, fishing, hunting, any of those things. So many things. And then here's kind of like how, if you want to focus your project sort of more linguistically, sort of linguistic focuses you could take in doing biocultural language documentation. So you can focus on taxonomies, which are just systems of categories and how they're related to each other. You could focus on semantics, meaning of words, or you could focus on discourse, like how words are used. Not that you have to, but you can. So this is going to be a little small. I'll try to bring it up bigger here. So taxonomies, again, they're just like categories. So here's an example. I'm going to just go through several examples of these kinds of things. So this is an example from an Australian Aboriginal language. And there's a word that means fish. And it is also the word that means all animal life, which is kind of cool. And so you can see there's a lot of different categories for different types of marine organisms. And then I think there's like 2 categories for some land organisms. Yeah, it looks like there's 2. So you can see that they have definitely extensive knowledge of marine organisms. And the taxonomy is just a way of kind of like keeping all that information categorized and easy to manage. And then here's an example of a life cycle, a documentation of a life cycle. So this is from Hawaiian. This is a fish, the moi fish. And you can see that it's got the life cycle here from the juvenile around to the adult female stage, the final stage here. And so this life cycle information, very important, tied to management and conservation of local resources. Here's another example of different kind of biocultural documentation. So here, this example is from Chontal, lowland Chontal in Mexico. And you can see there's different terms that have been documented for different types of landscape or terrain. And then spatial orientation, right? How do people, know which way to go? How do they give directions? How do they orient themselves in space? And then different types of soil types, which may be really practical for farming, maybe practical for building things, all sorts of stuff. There's different soil categorizations. And then here's one more example here, which is from Jahai from Malaysia. And this one is nice. It's hydrological terms. And what's nice about this one is they're all verbs. So sometimes when people are doing semantic documentation, or they're out to collect words, they're like, oh, give me the word for this thing, and give me the word for this thing. What's this thing? And they kind of can tend to focus a little too much on the nouns. So don't forget that you also have all this like rich ecological knowledge or biocultural knowledge inside verbs too, and besides other parts of speech. So again, so these are examples of all verbs that have to do with water, moving water, right? Okay, so we have one more topic to talk about. This is a shorter presentation because I'm just more curious to see what you guys are interested in doing. But this is a very important part, this topic. So intellectual property and ethics. This is a concern for all language documentation. It seems to be more so, though, for traditional knowledge. Although you find communities that are very protective over their language and feel the intellectual property over their language as a whole, and maybe don't want outsiders to know their language at all, to be allowed to learn it or anything like that. But that becomes more so the case when it comes to traditional knowledge. Sometimes people don't care if people know the language, but there's specific things within the language, specific domains that they maybe don't want to share. So anyway, linguists, we're usually interested in the grammar of a language, or those sorts of things. And community members are often interested in the cultural content. So what's nice about doing this kind of documentation is you do get a lot of interest from people. People are really interested in this information or knowledge. But some traditional knowledge can be very sensitive, so please be careful with that. So how do you document traditional knowledge while upholding and protecting the rights of the practitioners of that knowledge? So here's some stuff you can do. Basically inform yourself. So make sure you learn the intellectual property laws for the area you're working in. Even if it's your own country, even if it's your own community, you should first of all know what the law is. And unfortunately, many countries don't recognize Indigenous people's rights to their intellectual property, which is a huge, huge problem. You should obtain whatever permits you need. You should practice informed consent always. And remember that sometimes the best way to protect or respect people's rights is actually to not document. Depends on the situation. So here's some links for more stuff you can read about. So the World Intellectual Property Organization has a toolkit, and then the International Society of Ethnobiology has a code of ethics, so you can read those. And then courses, I'm going to show you the courses here, just more links. So World Intellectual Property Organization, again, has a couple free courses, and then one course that costs money. So you can learn more about intellectual property. Okay. Then we have these, I'm not going to click on these links, but you can check them out yourselves. These are just some examples of kind of like how traditional knowledge can be presented if you want to share it, and if you've determined that it's a safe thing, a good thing to do to share it. So the first one is a video, which is actually in an indigenous language, and then it's also translated, subtitled to a more widely used language, like a global language, right? And then the other two, I don't know, I like the WikiHow, I put them in there because I just think it's kind of an interesting way of presenting information. Doesn't mean you need to do that, but yeah. I also like that they're very simple. So it's good to start with something simple, like how to plant sugarcane. It's not like a huge topic. I mean, there's probably many different styles of planting sugarcane. But if you just focus on like, what are the couple different ways my community plants sugarcane, right? That's a small, manageable topic that you could document. So yeah, you can check those out. So this brings us to the end, which is hearing from you guys. So find a small bit of traditional or biocultural knowledge you'd like to document. It can be, again, something you actually do have knowledge of yourself that you think, hey, maybe not everyone will know this in my community in a generation from now. Or it can be something you don't know that you want to know more about, and you want to go, interview an elder or ask them to demonstrate a task for you, how to do it. And then using your skills you've learned about audio and video recording, linguistic analysis, just try to do a little mini documentation on some little small piece of traditional or biocultural knowledge. You never know, it might catch on. Everyone else might start picking other little pieces to document. And then do something with it afterwards. Whatever, again, you've deemed is the right thing to do. Maybe you want to share it, but not translate it. Maybe you want to share it and translate it. Maybe you want to put it in an archive. So something like that. All right, so that's all I got to say. I'm gonna take your questions. I'm gonna go scroll through and check these out. I see Anna is answering things, which is lovely. All right. I got somebody from Nigeria and Cameroon as well. This is great. All right, somebody said interested in religious practices, social practices, and folk stories. Somebody else said handicrafts, survival in the natural environment. Wow, cool stuff. And somebody is also already involved in documentation of ethno-medicinal practices. Very cool. And Anna asked some more questions about that. Medical practices, philosophy, folklore, and cultural celebrations. Wow, philosophy, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that. Looking what else you guys put. And Anna sharing some more information. And somebody from Pakistan. Wow, great. And we're seeing some examples of people noticing, that animal and meat are often the same word, which makes sense, right? Especially if you eat animals. Okay, I have a question. Do you have any recommendations in articles or books that talk about knowledge systems and their storage? Ooh, maybe a better question for the anthropologists than us. I wish I had asked that question of a presenter here at ICLDC last week. There were some good presentations. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I know I've read a couple things, but I can't think of anything that I really want to like recommend. So maybe if somebody else has a reply for that one. Sorry guys, I'm not an expert. I'm interested in this topic, but I'm far from an expert. Any other questions or any other stuff you guys want to share? Heritage seeds. What would that be? Would that be like a combined like seed bank with the knowledge? Or would that be as opposed to centralized seed bank, or would that be more of like a seed sharing, like heritage seeds, where everyone understands that it's kind of their responsibility to bank some of those seeds? Or am I just thinking too literally about the seeds? Um, please explain more about the seeds. Um, oh, good. And then, yeah, somebody shared an example where, yeah, linguists were asked to not do the documentation, and so they didn't. So good linguists. um, but I think in general, what we really like, a lot of what we want to do with language documentation is getting speakers to own the projects, to be doing their own projects, because one, linguists aren't going to save the language anyway, and two, it's going to probably be a better documentation, or more meaningful documentation, maybe. Vegetation, okay, so the seed banks is or heritage seeds. See, now I'm calling it seed banks. The heritage seeds is the vegetation and food sources. Oh, okay. Yeah. Very, very important. And people love to talk about food. They love to talk about food. um, but yeah, I think that's a wonderful documentation project to do. To start with some foods, and you might notice that there's some foods that used to be eaten more often in the past, and now they're not eaten as often, or sometimes there's foods that have kind of acquired like a cultural stigma where it's like, oh, only the country bumpkin mountain people eat this food or something like that, in which case, with that stigma attached to it, maybe it's in danger of no longer becoming a food source because it's looked down upon, even though it could be a very like nutritious food source. Food sovereignty, yeah, those sorts of things. Very good. Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of values associated with food. A lot of places have like prestige foods, prestige staple foods versus foods of like lesser status. Um, yeah, it's a big thing. And again, it definitely does not always correlate with nutrition at all. And sometimes switching to eating the higher prestige food, is a symbol of prestige, but you do lose maybe some cultural things that you had with that lower prestige food. Good. People talking more about involving the community. Yes. Basically, somebody just very well summarized informed consent, right? That people should be able to opt out, or they should be able to revise what they've said before about, dissemination of information. Like they should be able to change their mind and say, actually, I don't want this published or whatever. Yeah, so that no data should leave unless it's supposed to leave the community. Yeah. Do you think that the process of documentation itself can strengthen the ties of the community and bring them together to discuss their heritage and value its place? I think so. Um, like science is seen as very prestigious. Most places consider science very prestigious and consider technology quite prestigious. And it's kind of when you do that mixture of the old ways of doing things that maybe people think aren't interesting, but then you bring in, the video camera, you bring in the audio recorder, and you attract attention to it, and you attract a kind of like professional or scientific-ish attention. I mean, even if you're just a community member, the fact that you're kind of like focusing on this and saying, hey, this is like a thing that I think is cool and important, and I want to, record or whatever, document in some way. I think that can strengthen the ties of the community. I think that can like at least make people start talking about their heritage, start talking about these topics once they see one person is interested in it. Yeah. And also whatever part of the documentation project, whatever their role in the documentation project is, it brings them more invested into that heritage. Ooh, somebody wants to document taboo words and sacred practices. That's cool. I hope that works. I hope people will share the taboo words. I mean, maybe they don't want to, and then that's okay if they don't want to. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I think we'll just like maybe spend a few more minutes, have a little shorter presentation today. I don't know. I wish I had more examples for you guys, but I think you get the idea. I think that learning about these communities can help to highlight to governments the importance to protect them and also to give them their place in society as a whole. Yeah, definitely. That's again part of that. Like somebody is focusing on this, somebody is interested in this, and maybe the government has already decided this isn't valuable knowledge, and they don't value it, and they don't think this community knows anything or something like that, right? Then as soon as there's this other attention on it, maybe it will make the government reconsider their view. Or maybe we'll just shame the government if others see Indigenous people's rights. This is a very interesting question. It's a bit of a loaded question. I don't feel like you should ask language documentation people this question, but I will try to stop smiling. Can generativists, with their deductive and general theory rule prediction making methods, do good language description work? Yeah, I'm sure they can. I'm sure they can. Actually, because I mean, if you do have a strong theoretical whatever orientation, if you have a strong theoretical orientation, you do maybe that's your view, so you can see things that are interesting in terms of linguistics, in terms of maybe human cognition. You can see those things that are interesting because of how they fit or don't fit in the theory. So you can do good language description. The problem is if you're too focused on that, right? If you're too focused on the theoretically interesting parts of the language, then you're not going to get a full, thorough documentation. So as long as you're theoretically informed, but you're still sort of paying attention to the bigger picture, I think you can do a very good job. Okay, Anna was also laughing. All right, if you guys have any final questions for me, let me know. And then, of course, you can keep discussing this within the group. I'd love to see if you guys are feeding off each other. Right now I've seen everyone have really big ideas, which is great. But again, if you're having trouble getting started, start with a small little piece. Do you have any suggestions for toolkits to do basic documentation of ecological, biological knowledge? Toolkits. I think I have a specific paper that I can share, but it is only for photography. It's not even a toolkit, but I think I could assemble it as a toolkit maybe. I'm thinking of one paper in particular for photography of plants, because I think a lot of linguists are curious about that. They're like, well, if I take a picture of the plant, like what do I need to take a picture of? So I need to take a picture of just one leaf? And no, probably just one leaf's not going to do it. So I can share that paper. It's kind of old, so it recommends, I think it's from 2008, so it recommends like a certain quality of camera that probably you could get a much better camera now. But as far as what you should be photographing if you're trying to accurately capture a plant species, it's kind of good on that, I think. But yeah, I don't know if we have toolkits. We should have toolkits. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I'll have to look. So good question, Anna. All right. Anyone else? I'll give you another couple seconds. All right. I think I'm going to conclude on that note. Thank you all for your attention. And yeah, keep sharing throughout the week all these good ideas that you have. All right.